What made you decide to go the jazz route instead of something more commercial where it's probably more profitable, like pop, soul, or R&B music?
I think part of it is that jazz was what I heard most as a kid. We listened to everything, and my mother was determined that we would know everything. And so we listened to classical music, and we listened to rock. My parents had the Beatles, and we listened to the Beatles, and we listened to, I don't know what else, of course, old school R&B and country music. But I think part of it was we were around jazz musicians, and my parents' friends were into jazz, and so we would have evenings at home when I was very small, and my, those two other couples that lived in this apartment building that we lived in, on St. Elmo Drive. It would be Saturday night, and everybody would be in our apartment because my parents had kids and the others didn't. And they would sit and they play records, because that's what people in that era did. They play records, they talk about them, and it was all jazz, and even as we got older, unfortunately, my parents split up, but it was the same thing. I mean, so now in two houses, or like my dad's friends and my mom's friends, everybody's listening to jazz. And so it's become the water that I swim in, and I appreciate other genres, and in fact have been recently closely connected to a progressive rock producer and guitarist. We don't do any work together yet, but I have an appreciation for what he does. But it's just not you. I mean, you won't hear me singing Stairway to Heaven, though I really appreciate the song.
So you are of Caribbean background?
Yes, I am.
What's your racial mix, or
well, that's an interesting question. So what I would say is, when people ask me what my race is, my answer is always that I am a Black woman. But like, if you look at Ancestry, my Ancestry profile, it's like 52% African and 48% from the United Kingdom. What doesn't show up is my grandfather's roots, which is really interesting. My mother's father is he's gone, half Mexican and half Jamaican. My grandfather was born in Veracruz, Mexico, and his first language was Spanish.
Interesting. Could we perhaps see some Latin jazz projects coming up from you anytime in the future?
That's not outside of the realm of possibility. Actually, all three of the albums I've released in the last year and a half do have some kind of Latin component. Round Midnight Reimagined has both summer samba, which is like a Brazilian kind of feel, and what's the other one? Oh yeah, Round Midnight, which also it's kind of a bossa bolero sort of feel. I'll Be Home for Christmas has a Latin feel. That's on my Christmas album, The Gathering. And then Pure Imagination has a bossa version of When October Goes on it. So to do an all Latin jazz album, that's a possibility.
Sugar Hill.
It was a special place, given the time and historically what Blacks have gone through in this country. It's a fallacy to believe that racism and lynchings didn't occur in the North, because they did. It was certainly less frequent, and you didn't have the same type of history of enslaved Africans in the northern part of the United States. But New York itself was a place where at least it was safer for Black people to be. And just, you know, because of that, I think it was an easier place to gather. And there was a little more room for things like a Black couple to own a luncheonette.
That's still pretty amazing that your grandparents at that time owned their own business.
Yeah, what I came, you know, it's funny the things that you take for granted. I just presumed that, like every other establishment in Sugar Hill, was Black owned. And what I've learned in talking to one of my father's friends since my father passed away is that my grandparents' luncheonette was actually one of the few Black owned businesses in the Sugar Hill area. Yeah. So I just think, though, that, you know, when you live in a world where you know that most people are not going to accept you, and you have at least some freedom to live in a place and create a place where you're going to get support and find like-minded people, that's how a community gets established. And I think that Sugar Hill just happened to be one of those places.
Well, you did mention that Diahann Carroll being one of your inspirations and influences. Who have been some of your other singers that have been your inspiration and influenced you over the years?
Well, two who would be obvious, well, three who would be obvious would be Billie Holiday and Ella Fitzgerald and Sarah Vaughan, Carmen McRae to perhaps a little bit lesser degree, but certainly Shirley Bassey is another one, who also has West Indian roots. Bobby Caldwell. I know that sounds weird, but I'm a huge fan of his, and I've always appreciated what he does.